finding that person that you do feel safe with. It may be another family member. It may be a friend. It may be somebody that didn't even know your loved one, your officer. But it's somebody that you feel comfortable talking to, just being able to say, you know what, I'm really hurting. I'm really hurting because I missed my officer, my sibling, my spouse, whomever that might be.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the C.O.P.S podcast. My name is Blake Haynes. I am the multimedia specialist with Concerns of Police Survivors, national office located in Camdenton, Missouri. With me today, I've got Dr. Kathy Thomas. Kathy, thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my honor.
Kathy has worked with the organization with C.O.P.S for quite some time. Kathy, kind of give us an introduction, maybe some background, what we should know about Kathy Thomas.
I have been working with law enforcement. I'm a licensed psychologist and have been working with law enforcement for over 27 years and have been working with the C.O.P.S organization for about 26 years of that. So my introduction to Concerns of Police Survivors was working National Police Week in support services, like I said, about 26 years ago, and was very eye-opening. I had not been around anything like that. And so just fell in love with the organization and what they stand for and what they do, and the honor of being able to get to know families and coworkers of officers that have made that ultimate sacrifice has been extremely rewarding for me. I actually was introduced to kind of the law enforcement world when the Oklahoma City bombing happened, and I responded to that. And I realized that, I had kind of looked at law enforcement officers and first responders. I always used the analogy like little bitty kids look at their parents. They don't really look at their parents like they're human beings and they're impacted by things. They look at their parents like they can handle anything. And I realized I had looked at law enforcement and first responders the same way. So I realized kind of how crazy that was to think that way, and decided that there was something I could do to help them be able to do what they do and stay healthy, and their families. That's what I want to do. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. And like I said, my introduction to the C.O.P.S organization really just touched my heart. And I've joked that they would have to take a restraining order out on me to keep me away. So
within that process, so year 1 to year 26, right?
Mm-hmm.
What have you seen like growth wise, not only within the organization itself, but maybe some of the individuals you're working with, or even yourself? I mean, what does that growth look like kind of as a full circle?
Well, the organization has grown exponentially. When I first became involved with working with them, basically National Police Week, and then there were a handful of retreats for survivors, like literally 2 or 3. And the thing that really has stood out to me all these years is that, C.O.P.S really listens to the needs that survivors have. And so when they recognize that another survivor group or category, that some needs have not been met, and that for that particular group, then they do what they can to try to fulfill those needs and support them, including also supporting officer wellness and the traumas of law enforcement training that they do, and the national conference that they offer now, which that wasn't there when I first started. So I love the fact that we're supporting wellness also. Yeah.
Well, and to your point,
another thing that I was just going to say, another thing in terms of kind of the growth of individuals that I've been able to see and witness, which has really been one of my favorite things, is I've worked C.O.P.S Kids Camp for 25 of those 26 years. So I've had the opportunity to meet these little kids, ages 6 to 14, that have lost a parent in the line of duty. And now I've been able to see them grow up and become pretty amazing adults, and being able to witness them, some of them going into law enforcement, kind of following in their parents' footsteps, and just the things that they've been able to accomplish and the resiliency that they have that's, kind of helped them in other aspects of their life. So that's been extremely rewarding to get to see that happen.
And then maybe in terms of yourself, like maybe how you approach some of the situations or some of the occurrences that come up within that grief process. Like, have you seen any, growth within yourself with responding?
Well, it's constantly learning. I feel like I learn something or get something out of, every time I get a chance to interact with survivors or with officers. So I'm constantly trying to kind of take away lessons learned. And one thing that I have learned is it's not a one size fits all, working with different survivor categories. So working with spouses is a little bit different than working with siblings, for instance, or working with parents, or working even with the children. And so being able to recognize that there's some commonalities, but there's also some very unique, aspects and struggles that the different groups kind of have to navigate. So that's been learning.
You're telling me that everybody like for the most part, right? People grieve differently, right?
Correct.
And
Correct.
why is that? I mean, what have you kind of seen?
So again, there's some very universal kind of concepts to grief that everybody kind of goes through, but what makes it unique is maybe the time frame that they go through it, or the intensity of each of those kind of stages, for lack of a better word. And we hear about the 5 stages of grief, and it sounds very nice and neat. And you go through stage 1 and stage 2 and stage 3, and then, as I say, and then you're supposed to graduate from grief class, but it doesn't work that way. There's actually, I describe grief as a roller coaster, and eventually the roller coaster kind of levels out, but that loss is always there. So what I tell people is, grief is really a lifelong process. And so some of the things that kind of impact how we grieve personally or individually is our relationship with that person that we lost, what kind of relationship we had with them, not only our relationship like a sibling, a spouse, whatever, but also what kind of relationship we had with them impacts our grief. Even, what were my most recent interactions with that person? And, the other thing is, just as individuals, we react to things based on our genetics and our life experience and our family history and our training and education background. And so that's different for every single person. And that also affects how we grieve, how we learned early on, in the family, how to handle adversity or loss, affects how we grieve later in life. So there's some very common kinds of grief reactions, but then there's also a lot of uniqueness. And there's also not a timeline. People there'd like to be a timeline, right? That after a year, everything's back to normal. Well, it's never going to be normal like it was before. And so I think it is important to recognize that even in the same family, different family members can grieve differently. Even identical twins could grieve differently because they're different people.
I'm sitting here and I've got, I'm a sibling, right? I'm a sibling, and I've just lost my brother, and I cannot understand for the life of me why my other sister does not understand or get where I'm coming from. We're just completely polar opposites, right? Why is that okay?
Well, like I said, because you're different people. Being different is not right or wrong. It's just different. And you probably had different relationships with your brother. And again, for depending on the age, depending on birth order, might even affect that. If now all of a sudden, if your brother was the oldest and now all of a sudden you're the oldest, well, that's going to carry something different than maybe your sister who may be the youngest now, or vice versa. So even roles tend to change in the family sometimes, and that can affect how we grieve. So just recognizing that we're all different people and there is no right or wrong.
How does someone maybe go about recognizing exactly what you're talking about, why that's okay, or how they can, learn to not only themselves accept that there may be differences there, but then go about assisting that individual, or maybe being willing to accept assistance from somebody else? Because I know another thing that we hear quite frequently, right, is that I may not be ready day one where my sister is ready day one to have that support and have that peer support. It may take me months, years, we see that with the retreats themselves, where individuals have kind of had a little bit of space in between, the death and then when they've attended. So what would you maybe tell somebody?
Again, I think part of that may even go back to our own personalities. For instance, introverts who tend to not need as many people around, right? as opposed to extroverts. So again, neither one is right or wrong. They're just different styles of how to interact and connect with people. And so introverts may need more kind of alone time to kind of process things, or more quiet time to process things, whereas extroverts may need, I need to talk more. I need to have somebody there that I can talk to. And then just recognizing that they may not be quite ready to reach out to somebody. And like you said, we see that a lot at the retreats, that, at the retreats, it's a whole mixture of people and with different needs. So I think it's also important that if, for instance, in a family, if people are grieving differently, the more that they can communicate with each other and just kind of be able to say, here's where I'm coming from, and actually try to understand where the other person's coming from, then the better. Sometimes we perceive it as, oh, they didn't love them as much because they're not crying all the time. And that's not accurate at all. Some people are going to be more apt to cry than other people just because they're different. So it doesn't mean, that's not a measure of how much that person was loved or cared about. It's just an indication of the differences in the people that are actually doing the grieving.
And maybe some self-identification there when it comes to evaluating, a survivor's sibling, spouse, what have you, right? Maybe just looking into it. And when do you think that they kind of understand or maybe know, maybe I'm on the fence. What should I look for internally to be like, okay, I'm going to make that leap? Is there maybe a tip to a trick to the trade or something like that? Or
well, I think just being aware, being able to identify and be willing to also identify or being aware of changes that I'm seeing in myself, things that are different than the way things used to be. For instance, if I typically am more extroverted and I'm just kind of isolating myself, that's very different. And just on isolation is never good. There's a difference in needing some alone time and isolating yourself. And we all need some connection with other human beings. So if I notice that, or if I notice that maybe even doing things like behaviors that aren't real healthy, drinking more or something like that in order to kind of numb out, so I think just being willing to kind of look at ourselves and say, yeah, this is different. I don't like this and I want it to be different. I want to feel better. And so finding that person that you do feel safe with. It may be another family member. It may be a friend. It may be somebody that didn't even know your loved one, your officer. But it's somebody that you feel comfortable talking to. Just being able to say, you know what, I'm really hurting. I'm really hurting because I missed my officer, my sibling, my spouse, whomever that might be, is important.
Right. And I mean, honestly, if you look at concerns of police survivors in general, I mean, that's kind of what we're founded on, that peer support aspect, that,
yes,
being able to reach out and make a difference within each other and not just ourselves. Maybe kind of talk about that a little bit. So maybe it's not a sibling, maybe it's, an extended family member, or maybe it's even a coworker, right? Of those that, of your officer that is grieving. What should I do if I notice, okay, Bob Smith, my cousin he's drinking heavily. He's not acting the same as he was before the death. What, maybe is there some ways that I can maybe reach out, or what should I maybe look into to kind of help out?
And it's a really good point because, yes, Concerns of Police Survivors is based on peer support. So it's based on being able to connect with other people that have had a similar experience that I've had. We can never totally know what it's like to walk in somebody else's shoes. But somebody that's having another similar experience, like the loss of a loved one and the loss of an officer, they're going to be more apt to feel comfortable talking to somebody else that's been in that similar experience. And so that's the whole basis of C.O.P.S. And so if you, for instance, if you do have concerns about somebody, you notice some things, certainly one thing is to maybe even reach out to Concerns of Police Survivors and say, hey, this is what I'm noticing. Are there any resources available, right? And get information about like the retreats. But if I'm one of those survivors that's struggling, but I don't know what to do, right? Concerns of Police Survivors is a great way to connect with other survivors. And the C.O.P.S office is amazing at getting survivors connected with either other survivors or with mental health professionals that are familiar with working with survivors and with law enforcement, somebody that they can talk to. Sometimes it may just be a long distance phone call, but that may be my first connection with, okay, this is somebody that gets it. And that's the beauty of the retreats is, you're around people that get it, and you don't have to explain yourself, and you don't have to, try to hide how you're reacting. You don't have to worry about taking care of anybody else. Sometimes that's the thing that gets in the way for some survivors, is they're so focused on worrying about other people that they lose sight of taking care of themselves. And so when they can be at a retreat, for instance, with other survivors that understand what it's like to kind of navigate that journey and to see the other side, right? To be able to sit down with survivors that have gotten to the other part of that roller coaster that's more level now. And that gives them hope. The peer support and talking to people that have had similar experiences, that have learned how to kind of navigate that and can, give you hope is invaluable.
One of the things that we hear a lot is, we left the retreat. I felt great leaving the retreat. And now I'm 2 months down the road and I'm in a rut. But with those retreats, you have those lifelines, you have those people that you can reach out to. And
yes,
and that is so important. I mean, that peer support aspect, like you said. Can you kind of talk about some of that though? I mean, just branching off that piece a little bit, but that survivor letdown, like what that looks like off of that.
Yeah. So when you spend, 4 days with people, a whole group of people that get it, and then you go back to kind of your real world where that support is just not right there. There does tend to be a letdown, like, oh, now what? And now that grief roller coaster, I'm hitting one of those downs, and what do I do? But the beauty of the retreats is they connect with each other and they stay connected. So we provide them with opportunities, ways to stay connected. We provide them with everybody's contact information, including the clinicians that are there. We provide them with, hopefully, with tools. That's the goal, to use when they get home. And we also kind of prepare them for that letdown that may happen. And as I tell people, even as that roller coaster kind of levels out, there may be something at some point, 5 years, 10 years down the road, that all of a sudden kind of slaps them in the face or punches them in the gut. And it doesn't mean they're back at square one. It doesn't mean that, oh my gosh, I have to go through this whole thing again, right? It just means that there's actually a term for it called temporary upsurges of grief, that something has touched their heart, something has reminded them of their loss, and in a pretty significant way. And what I tell people about that is they just need to be gentle with themselves. Reach out to those lifelines, like you said, use those tools that they've been, given access to in order to just get through that tough spot, in that roller coaster. But eventually it's going to level out again.
That's another very, very strong point that, we will hear is it's 10 years down the road and I've been to the retreats or I've been provided with assistance and I've kind of got over a lot of what I thought were my hurdles. And now I'm looking back and I've kind of reverted a little bit, and knowing that you have those individuals to reach out to or that you can lean on to, or, we hear it all the time from all age groups and all survivorships that I had a really, really bad day. I picked up the phone, somebody answered, and I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm back to where I needed to be. Kathy, what would you say to maybe some individuals that are on the fence about maybe attending a retreat or maybe seeking some assistance, period?
In terms of attending a retreat, what I would encourage them to do if they're on the fence is to talk to another survivor, talk to somebody else that has been to one of the retreats and get their perspective. It's one thing for the C.O.P.S office and for the clinicians to say, oh yeah, this is a great thing. But when they can talk to people that have actually experienced it from that survivor standpoint, then they can get a better understanding of what to expect. Also, I do want to say that, the retreats are not 4 days of sitting around crying. We have a lot of fun there too. We do, give people the opportunity to have some hard conversations if they need to, but we also do a lot of activities and fun things, and we laugh a lot, which for some people, that may be the first time they've laughed since the loss of their officer. And so it's very refreshing for them to say, I can do this again. I can laugh again. So talking to another survivor would be really really important if they're on the fence. And if they're just in terms of reaching out maybe for professional assistance from like a mental health professional or something. The other thing that C.O.P.S has is resources around the country and we're very willing to help you find resources near where you live that would be a good fit, and that either, have worked with either law enforcement or trauma and grief and things like that. So we really do, some research about their backgrounds, and we'll try to help people find a good fit. But what we know is that the more we can talk about our experiences, the better we can process them, the better our brain processes it. So being able to have a way to put words on what you've been through, your grief, your loss, the trauma of it is really going to be important.
Are there maybe some other tips outside of just peer support? So what else would you encourage individuals to do, like maybe exercise, or is there other steps that you can take to
Absolutely
alleviate some of that grief?
One of the things is to try to, and it's kind of hard, at least initially, but to try to get back into kind of a routine that's comfortable for you, that's familiar to you. And honestly, the first year after a loss, we're kind of on autopilot. We're kind of, we're going through the motions. We're just doing the basics and what we need to do to kind of get through the days. And eventually that autopilot kind of wears off. So it's not unusual for survivors to really experience more of the emotional impact of the loss, even year 2 or 3. But at those times, being able to kind of have some kind of routine that's familiar and comfortable. Exercise is extremely valuable, and it doesn't have to be hardcore kind of exercise. It could be taking walks, but doing some kind of physical activity, and particularly cardio kind of activity that actually affects serotonin, which is the chemical that affects anxiety and depression. So it really does help us feel better emotionally when we can do something like that. And like I said, it could be riding a bike, it could be taking a walk, it could be, swimming or, playing basketball, something like that, whatever. But on, kind of a regular routine. The other thing is there's a very strong physical component to grief. It's not just emotional. It affects us physically. And so the better we can take care of ourselves physically, having nutrition in our body, getting, moving our body, having some kind of exercise or physical activity, getting sleep, things like that, then the better we're going to be able to navigate the emotional stuff. The better we process the emotional stuff, then the better we feel physically too. But that physical component is really, really strong. And so literally sometimes people may say, I just hurt all over. They really do. That's a real thing. They're not just making it up. They're not just making excuses. Sometimes it really does feel like I can't get out of bed. But I tell people at those times is just take small steps, break things down into very small, manageable steps.
So we're always told stories, right? And one of the ones that definitely stuck with me, I mean, I've been here for 26, but I've been here for 5. So not quite the knowledge you have, right? But one of the ones that always stuck with me is I heard a survivor basically tell me when it first happened, I couldn't get out of bed. Like I didn't want to get out of bed. All I wanted to do was sleep. I wanted to lay there. I wanted to dream it away, wish it away. Like it never happened. To build off of that, they basically told a few of us that, doing little things like opening the mail, I didn't want to. I didn't want to. If there was a bill in there, I didn't care to pay it. And that's some of the things. And obviously, that individual is not at that same spot, right? They work through that in with help of peer support and things like that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a very real thing that everybody has a different reaction to some of those things. And I would 100% agree with that routine aspect of getting yourself back to as normal as possible, your quote unquote new normal, because obviously it'll never be quite the same again.
Right. And I think when we can break things down into those small steps, like, okay, I don't want to open the mail, I'll open this one. And then that's it, right? But they've accomplished that then. And so when they can take those small steps and realize, okay, each step is an accomplishment, each step is progress, then that is empowering and helps us heal. So
absolutely. One thing that I really wanted to touch on was I just lost an officer. I have all these people from all these avenues coming and telling me they're sorry and they, what can they do to help and that kind of thing. And maybe they're saying things that I not only just don't want to hear at the time, but some of the things are just coming off like, we'll say silly is the word I'm going to use, right? So how do I process that and maybe understand, okay, I don't want to hear this, but they are coming from a genuine place and maybe try to understand that.
I do believe that most people are very well intentioned. I also know that sometimes we don't know what to say, but we feel like we should say something. And so we don't always think about maybe the impact of what we're saying. And so we're trying to make the other person feel better, right? When we say something, we're trying to show that we support them. But you're right. Sometimes things can come across as being insensitive, silly, as you said, or other words. And so when I'm talking to survivors, I'm all about education. And so I tell them, I said, it's okay to educate those people. It's okay to let them know. I appreciate that you're trying to be supportive or you're trying to be helpful right now. But what you said really wasn't helpful. And here's why. Either I'm not ready to hear that, or, that came across as maybe minimizing my pain, or, it came across as insensitive. So educate them. It's not going to erase what they said to you. However, it'll make them think before they say it to somebody else. The other thing we see a lot or hear a lot is survivors that talk about how, yes, everybody's there initially, and particularly agencies and departments will, make these promises. We'll always be here. You're always going to be part of our department or our family, or we're going to be at every one of your child's baseball games. And again, I think they're well-intentioned and I think they mean what they say at the time they say it, but those really aren't realistic comments. And so then when they're not at the son's baseball games, or, there's a function at the department and nobody invited you, then that feels like another loss to those families. So what I encourage agencies and departments and coworkers to do is make realistic promises. If you're going to make promises, then make sure they're realistic, make sure they're doable. It's much more doable to say, send me your son's baseball schedule, and I would like to be at the games if I can, or be at some of the games if I can. That's a much more realistic statement than I'll be at every one of your son's games. So just for, again, agencies and departments to know, don't make promises that are unrealistic and that you can't keep. And just know that those families feel like that other loss. It's not realistic to say we'll be there from now on every day, right? So, and then also for those families, those survivors, to realize it's not realistic for me to be able to rely on one other person or my department or whatever to be there for everything either. So they have to be realistic also.
Right. I mean, and there's terms that we've heard or phrases that we've heard that I've actually heard, some exactly what you're talking about. Hey, the term I understand. And I've heard basically some feedback, and I thank you for attempting or, making that connection, but you're not quite in the same shoes as I am. Right. It's basically to that gist.
Yes.
But you're absolutely right. Making that educational connection of, hey, thank you for making the effort. I appreciate what you're doing and really thinking about me, my family, etc. However, that maybe go about it just slightly differently, right?
Right.
So you're telling me it's not normal, right? Oh, no, it is normal, right? Right? So that's
normal is a setting on the dryer.
Another term I want you to kind of address is the normalcy that what we're talking about here. But tell me what fine means. What does that mean for me?
Well, so there is a tendency when people say, how are we doing? We say fine. and whether we're, quote, fine or not. It's just kind of our standard answer. And it's especially an answer when people don't want to say how they're doing. So yes, fine is actually an acronym. And
I would ask you to go into super detail there, but
I can clean it up, but basically the acronym is, you're not okay, right? So that's what the acronym is. So yeah, we need to, if somebody, first of all, if you're going to ask somebody how they're doing, my recommendation is that you be willing to listen to how they're doing, and if somebody asks you how you're doing, then if it's somebody that you feel comfortable with, then be honest with them and let them know. It's okay to say, you know what, I'm getting through it a day at a time, or I'm getting through things. And that's another thing we tend to hear a lot is people will say, aren't you over it yet? Right. And with grief, we don't ever get over it because the loss is always there, but we get through it. Being honest with people that you feel comfortable being honest with about how you're doing, that's going to give you the opportunity to truly get the support that you need.
In the time that I've worked for cops, I've been around, conversed, heard many stories, and done what I can to be a support system, right? As a staff member, as a national staff member. But one thing that I always try to echo to everybody that would ask me for advice when it comes to handling some of these situations is, Kathy, I am not Dr. Kathy Thomas. I am not a mental health professional, and I will not pretend to be. One piece of advice that I always tell everybody is you don't have to say anything. Just listen. Just listen, because a lot of the times that's really what that survivor is really looking for is hey, I've got a lot on my shoulders right now, and I've got a lot on my plate, and I just need to say it. I just need to get it off my chest. And don't feel like you have to be right. I mean, you don't have to. That's one of my biggest things I always tell, especially like newer employees or people who ask, like I said, for advice is, don't feel like you have to say the right thing. Just listen, be there for them, and do what you can to help out.
Right.
And if it gets, another thing to obviously understand is if it gets to a place where you're not capable of assisting and that, right? Mm-hmm. If you're at a retreat or you're whatever, see what you can do to get them assistance, right? Go find Kathy Thomas, or if you're not at a retreat, you're at home, find them somebody to talk to. Call us.
Right.
We will find you somebody to get you in touch with, wherever you may be.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you're right. Just being willing to listen. As humans, we need to tell our story. We need to talk about things. And like I said, it helps us process it. So just being willing to listen and then asking them, what do you need from me? Right. So let them tell you what they need. And they may say, I just need to vent. Okay. Yeah.
Well, and it could be, you can obviously attest to this. Everybody has different triggers as well. So it could be something that you're not even thinking about. They could have picked up a Coke out of the cooler, and that's what triggered them because their officer, that's all they drank or that's all they cared about. And you don't have to know. You don't have to understand. Like I said, you don't have to understand because you don't.
Right. Yeah.
But so again, Kathy, I'll ask you. So what is normal, right?
Like I said, it's a setting on the dryer. So.
Right. Kathy, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to sit down with us. It's very appreciative. I know this will open a lot of eyes to the grief process and just in general, and being able to understand that if you're a survivor, you don't have to grieve the same as everybody else. It's okay. And for others, it is okay for them to be grieving that way. It's okay for them to maybe not be the exact same as you. Similar, yes. The same, no.
Right. And the other thing I would say too is, if you don't know what to say to someone, then simply say, I don't know what to say. I don't have the words. The other thing that we see often or hear about often is that people who are survivors who are grieving feel like that other people have disconnected from them. And I think, again, they don't know what to say, so they choose not to say anything or not to reach out. Much better to say, I just don't know what to say. So don't be afraid. And you're not going to remind the survivor of their loss. They live with that loss every single minute of every single day. And sometimes people are afraid that they're going to say things that, oh, I don't want to upset them. You're not. And the other kind of, I guess, parting words is use their officer's name. That's the biggest fear when somebody loses somebody they loved and cared about, is that their loved one would be forgotten. And so they want to hear stories. They want people to talk about them. So don't be afraid to do that.
Absolutely. Especially I've heard that quite frequently from like the children's side of this as well, is,
Yes.
Maybe they were young when this happened, this took place, whether they lost their, their father or their mother. And your memories, your stories are the only real connection that they have, because they didn't get to experience some of that. So you're absolutely right. Kathy, again, thank you so much for coming on, and look forward to seeing you at the retreats this year.
That's right. Well, thanks for having me. Yeah. And let me know if there's anything else I can do.
Absolutely. And thank you all for joining us. Again, you can find us on everywhere you listen to podcasts. And check us out on our website, www.concernsofpolicesurvivors.org, or give us a call at the national office at 573-346-4911.